Hi there, everyone. 1 o'clock on a Wednesday. We welcome you to the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break. We're so happy to have you with us today. Go ahead and drop us a line on our chat. Let us know where you're watching from, what region, what your school district is, what's happening in your school district. To my right, Edgar Zazueta, ACSA Senior Director of Policy and Governmental Relations. I'm Naj Alikhan, ACSA Senior Director of Marketing and Communications. We're back after Thanksgiving week. Edgar, how are you? How was your vacation?
It was good. It was definitely a different type of Thanksgiving week. I think that we can all say the same, but it feels good. Obviously, thankful in a difficult year. There was that moment to just reflect as we've been talking over the last couple of weeks. And the interesting part here at the beginning of the week, and I had a feeling this was going to happen, we had this conversation about what are we going to talk about this week? Do we have anything noteworthy? And sure enough, the week has taken care of itself. So we have a lot to talk about now.
Yeah, absolutely. And we want to say hi to Alexis and John and Heather watching us today. Edgar is exactly right. I have notes aplenty over here. I've got highlighter all over the place. We've got a very big show for you today. We've got a lot of subjects to talk about. Again, let us know where you're at. Say hello, Ellen and Maria. Heather, so good to have you guys with us today. Let's go ahead and let's start talking about the COVID situation here. I do want to let you know we've got two star reporters, one from the Sacramento Bee, one from Politico, who'll be joining us a little bit later on in the show to just give us a little bit more about what's happening here in the state. But Edgar, let's talk about the spike in COVID-19 cases, some potential action that could come out of the state capitol, out of the governor's office. Our executive director, Wes Smith, sent out a message last night to members about the spiking COVID cases, and you've got some additional details.
Yeah, I think so. As everybody's seen, it's probably the headline in every news source, at least here locally, in terms of a potential being the key word, potential further action, further restrictions. I think the stay-at-home order is what the governor alluded to. And we've talked a lot on a weekly basis that when the governor speaks, we all tune in, we try to get some of those messages. Sometimes he's going to tell us directly. This governor also likes to do a lot of the foreshadowing in the press conference, and he alluded to this week, given frankly, I mean, we have to call it for what it is. I think the pandemic numbers have never been worse, right? And I think in the wake of that, this Monday, the governor announced that they were considering, Dr. Ghaly were considering some further actions to try to stem the tide, that our hospital capacity is probably at an all-time low in terms of just being able to manage the increase in rates. And as a result, this is the governor's words, that they were considering some further actions and potential what you call stay-at-home order, or something that could resemble what we saw in March. Since then, so obviously, when we hear this, the question we probably got hundreds of times here in the last couple of days from our members as they saw the headlines is asking us, how is this going to impact schools? If there's going to be further action, will it impact schools? Will we have to close down, namely, if we were already open, if we're in a county that is purple and goes into territory, or if we were planning reopening, what will this mean? So we try to do our due diligence, ask the governor's office, and while they, whether there'll be an order or not, or what that will look like, was still definitely, that there's no assurances on what may or may not happen there. We'll let the governor speak for himself on that end. We were told, this is as of yesterday, that they didn't anticipate that any further action would impact schools. So in other words, if there was further action or further restrictions, that their intent is, as of yesterday, is to allow schools to continue to operate if they were operating. At the end of the day, is that the current guidelines on school reopening would still be in place.
Yeah, and I think that that's key, because you and I and Wes were talking through the evening about questions that would still come in from our members. And I think it's important. Wes always wants to remind, our members, we know how important it is to get students back into the classroom. And so the elementary waiver is out there, small groups out there. And of course, ACSA is here to support that. So if you need support with that, definitely let us know. Muhammad Warad, our loyal viewer, tells us that he's full of pumpkin pie after his vacation. Scott Smith from ABC Unified. Good to see you. Sarah over at Modesto City. Good to see you as well. Lisa Salas Brown, our loyal viewer, and Holly. Good to see all of you. Edgar, this also came out last night from CIF, California Interscholastic Federation. They're in charge of youth sports. They have announced that they are postponing an update to their youth sports guidelines. It doesn't look like they expect anything from CDPH until after January 1. There's some additional changes to regional and state championship events. Our social media whiz, Gianna Miller, is going to go ahead and put the link to the CIF information coming up in the chat. But Edgar, that's certainly something we have heard a lot about, something that our members care deeply about, and something that we've just been kind of waiting for, and it looks like we've got more of a delay.
Yeah, unfortunately, I know this is not the news that some folks wanted to hear. I know we've been talking about this for months in terms of trying to get some certainty, trying to get some guidelines on what is the status. Even now, as CIF initially had pushed the calendar to December, folks were just wondering what's the status. I don't think anybody really anticipated that we would be having competitions. Kind of, frankly, probably a little irresponsible given that we're at the height of this pandemic to be talking about competition right now. But I think the bigger question was, what's the roadmap? What is it that we're going to see down the line, and under what conditions will youth sports be able to operate? And we've been involved in some conversations there. But I think the bottom line for today is that the CIF has announced that CDPH, the California Department of Public Health, is not ready to release any guidelines now. Frankly, I think they have their hands full, and I think they're being sensitive to, in the midst of what we're dealing with, to put out anything on youth sports. But with that said, we know it puts our members in a tough spot. We know it's putting a lot of families, and namely students, right? Like, you can't underscore the challenges. I know you and I are both youth soccer coaches. We both have kids. We both see them hurting for not being able to engage with their friends and just have that competition. But bottom line, we're going to have to wait a little bit longer and try to be as patient as possible on further guidelines from CIF.
Yeah. And I'll tell our viewers, our ACSA campus tour, which is moving from Tuesday to Thursday this week, we're going to be talking with a superintendent from Placerville Union School District who was involved in an action this past weekend over at the state capitol about youth sports. He's going to talk a little bit about that and what he's hoping to accomplish. All right, so we've had a very busy week. We've heard about the spike in COVID cases. Another county, Mono County, added to the list of counties that is now in the purple stage for the blueprint for a safer economy. We thought we'd bring in two-star reporters to talk about what has happened here in the state over the last week. So let's go ahead and bring them in now. Sophia Bolag covers California politics and government from the Sacramento Bee. She's also served as a Capitol reporter for the Associated Press and the Los Angeles Times. And Mackenzie Mays is the top California education writer for Politico and is a previous winner of the National Press Club Press Freedom Award. For both of you, Sophia and Mackenzie, thanks so much for being with us today. Sophia, let me just go straight to you. What's the latest you're hearing on COVID-19 and from the governor's office as far as what's coming next here for COVID-19?
Yeah, so thank you guys for having me. And as you guys were discussing at the start of this program, basically we're in probably the worst time we've seen during this pandemic in terms of cases rising quickly. They're rising more quickly than we've seen at any point during the pandemic, including that spike we saw over the summer. So things are looking pretty grim. And Newsom talked about this along with his Health and Human Services chief, Dr. Mark Galley. They both talked about this on Monday. On Monday, they were anticipating that if cases continue the way that they're going, that we could see hospitals, specifically intensive care units, overwhelmed in the middle of this month. So that's something they're very concerned about. And they said that if we don't start seeing numbers sort of declining or slowing down, that they're very seriously considering another stay-at-home order, similar to what we had in March. We're in some ways better prepared than we were in March in terms of surge hospital capacity and protective equipment, but there's still certainly limits on the healthcare system. So that's what they're worried about right now.
Hey, Mackenzie, thanks for joining us. And a question that you and one of your colleagues wrote an article a couple weeks ago that made some waves here in our education circles, and you got some strong reactions from some Democratic legislators about the role that the state is taking in terms of reopening. Obviously, we're in the midst of the pandemic, so it makes it a little challenging, but I think there has been some growing frustration that we've heard in terms of what the state, in terms of direction, right? In terms of taking this active role, in terms of directing when schools should open. Given some of those reactions you got from, frankly, Democratic legislators, was wondering, do you think that's the beginning of a trend? I know, obviously, you've been doing a lot of reporting on this front. What do you see in terms of the perspectives of the policymakers as we move into 2021?
Yeah, I think we've definitely reached a turning point. We're to the point where if it's not edging out these other concerns about the virus, it's at least equal. We're really hearing conversations from parents and teachers and education advocates really concerned about the risks and rewards of not going into the classroom. So we don't have a lot of data about the virus, but we know that the transmission is lower for younger kids, that there are some schools pulling it off if they use the right protocols. And then we also know that without schools, grades are horrible for some students. Literacy is down. So, even Democrats and progressives, everyone from big city mayors to unions to superintendents have sort of reached this point where they're sort of begging for guidance from the state because, nobody really knows what to do at this point. And so maybe in the beginning, we saw more Republicans and other sides to it say, let's stay open. We've made a shift here, I think, because we're starting to see that there are concerns not just about the virus, but about what happens without schools.
Hey, Sophia, let me go ahead and ask you a question. You'll be happy to know we got a message in from our great member, Adam Clark, over there in Vallejo. He says, it's great to hear from you. So, Sophia, you've got a fan who's a viewer on our show. You were talking, when I asked you the previous question about the spiking COVID numbers, you talked about a potential action from the governor's office. I want to ask you, because if we go back to March and talk about a stay-at-home order, that mostly came from the hospitals not being supplied to where they needed to be, being over, there was so much going on. Now, are we to understand that any other potential action from the governor's office is based right now on the spiking number of cases, or is it combined spiking cases and the pressure on hospitals?
Yeah, and I'll just, before I answer that, say hi to Mr. Clark. He was my high school principal.
Look at that.
Yeah, a high school student at Miramani High in Orinda. So hi, Mr. Clark. So in response to your question, what Dr. Galley said on Monday is that the real metric that they're really looking at very closely in terms of determining whether we're going to have another stay-at-home order or the extent to which they're going to intensify restrictions is ICU capacity. So as counties approach capacity in their intensive care units, that's really the metric that they're going to be looking at.
Yeah, I know I'd be nervous if my high school principal was watching. So that is very cool. That's a first on the show. Mackenzie, a quick follow-up to we talked about what the legislators' response, and you talked about how that has definitely shifted. It goes without saying that one of the conversations that our folks have been challenged with, our administrators, is conversations that they're often having with their union partners, with their labor partners, with our teachers, other employees, in terms of these reopening talks. In the wake of this shifting perspective, in the wake of potential action that we may or may not see from the governor's office, have you heard anything from, whether it be statewide or local, how our labor partners are reacting to all this news?
Yeah, I think it's definitely had a chilling effect. January was a date that a lot of unions and districts had agreed to as a goal to get back into classrooms. And then now we have this surge. San Diego Unified, I think yesterday, had to say, you know what, we have to stop our plans. We can't phase in as quickly as we had hoped. And part of that is concerns from teachers who sort of look around and see that other indoor operations are not allowed, so why should schools be allowed? Now, there's another side to that, obviously, who would say, you know, schools is the one thing that should be open, even at the worst of it. But teachers are definitely pointing to this surge as a reason for concern.
Let me ask a question for both of you. This comes from Angela Shell, one of our viewers, and it's I kind of want to take a little broader. She asks, more restrictive order should indicate complete school closures. Does it seem like the governor will go down this route? I think this brings up a question. If we do have some type of stay-at-home order, how restrictive will it be? So, Sophia, I'll have you answer that, and then Mackenzie, if you will, as well. Where are we looking like as far as restrictiveness is concerned with what's going on right now with this spike in cases and any potential type of action from the governor's office?
Yeah, so at this point, in my reporting, I'm not aware that the governor has made a final decision about what a potential stay-at-home order exactly would look like, but they are very seriously considering it. And things are fluid. So this is, the information that I have right at this moment. This could change. It could have changed in the last couple of minutes since we've been talking. But at this point, I'm not aware of any planned changes to school closures and the rules surrounding those, the existing rules that are already in place. Not aware of any planned changes at this point. In terms of how broad the order might be, on Monday, Dr. Galley and the governor both talked about, they specifically said that they were considering a stay-at-home order for purple tier counties. Specifically, that's most counties in the state, the vast majority. I think there's only maybe a handful of counties that are not in the purple tier, and it's the vast majority of the population of the state live in purple tier counties. So that's a little bit of what we know in terms of scope at this point. But like I said, anything could have changed since Monday, and at this point, we're sort of waiting to see what the governor decides in terms of scope.
Mackenzie, your thoughts on restrictiveness? I mean, how deep could this impact members? Because obviously now we have another county that's been added to the list in the purple for the blueprint for a safer economy. The restrictiveness of any potential action that comes from the governor's office. How do you think that could impact districts throughout the state?
Yeah, I mean, like Sophia said, we don't have a lot of hard news to report on that. There's a lot unknown, but what we do know is that the governor has made pathways for schools to choose to open. And we do know that he is heavily dependent on local control. And so what I think that means that we could see is that even if we have a stay-at-home order, that if schools want to open, that there will be a pathway for them to do so. Because we know that even in purple tiers, if they've already tried to reopen, they can choose to stay open, even in our worst, rates of cases. There is a sort of caveat there that gets complicated because as of now, if you're in a county that is in purple and has been moved back to that highest tier and you haven't attempted to open, you can't open. You need to prove for a couple of weeks that you can maintain lower rates. So I don't know if that will be changed, but I think that a lot of eyes are on the governor about what he's going to do if there is a stay-at-home order, because back when the pandemic hit in March and April, he said the right thing to do was to close schools. And he's still leaving it up to local districts, but if you listen to him every day like we all do, he definitely recognizes the risks of not having schools, and he has paved the way, whether it's waivers or being able to open even in that worst tier. So, I think that signals that he would consider allowing schools to open no matter what, maybe.
Yeah, and just to add on to this point that Mackenzie's making, because this was another question that we've gotten a number of times since our announcement last night in terms of the indications that the governor's office made. We got, and I think Gina, one of our early questions we got today, asked if we have a waiver once we've had a waiver authorized, what if you have an approved waiver but not yet open? And we asked this question to the administration, and their answer is that waivers are independent of any action from the blueprint. So in other words, yes, their intent is that if you have an approved waiver and have not yet opened, you do have authority to open, even if you haven't physically opened today or whenever there may be further action.
And we just got in a question from Janet Gray, and I would ask Edgar this one because Janet asked, when will they offer waivers again? And this is something that ACSA is able to support districts if indeed they do have questions about waivers. Edgar, is there a mechanism for members if they need support?
Well, here's the tricky part. I mean, there's already the waiver authority now, and that's already part of the guidelines that you can go through your county health department and ask for the waiver. There is provisions there, and then now the problematic part is that there is some provisions about what the case rates could be and under what circumstances they would actually consider waivers. And one of the things we haven't said, we're talking a lot about state guidelines. As we talked, I think, on our last show, the local county health department and local county public health does have the ability to make the call that may be different from the state. So in other words, the state sets the floor. They could say, yes, schools can continue to operate. The county does have the authority to make the call and say, no, because case rates are so bad right now, we're going to shut down our schools. So that's the one big caveat that we have to give in this. So to this waiver question, I think it just remains to be seen. It would depend on what the county situation is. We would advise to get in contact with county public health or just get in contact with them, and we could help on that end.
All right. John Eberly just mentions today that I've got a nice background over here, art projects here in the kindergarten classroom. Hey, Sophia, let me talk to you about this. Your colleagues reported that there are 320,000 doses of the coronavirus vaccine that could arrive in the state as early as in the next few weeks. And we've heard about the different phases of distribution. We've heard about healthcare workers, first responders, essential businesses. I think that educators might be wondering right now about where exactly they may fit, if they even fit among that distribution model. Is there any reporting right now about how they may fit within there?
Yeah, so I would say decisions about beyond just the first, well, even for just the very first wave, which will not include teachers, it's going to be mostly for healthcare workers, this first batch of vaccines. But discussions are ongoing at both the federal level and at the state level about exactly who's going to get vaccines when, how the priorities are going to work, how they're going to be distributed. I would say that at this point, we don't know exactly where teachers might fall into that, sort of essential worker category. That's a very broad category. Essential workers are going to be prioritized before the general public. But where teachers fall into that category, I would say is unclear. But, I think many people consider to be teachers to be essential workers, and so certainly they would be considered as part of that group.
Mackenzie, I'll start the next question with you, but Sophia, you could jump in there, and we could speculate on this. But obviously, we don't have firm information yet. But we got a question, I think, from Barbara Nemko. If there is further action, how do we think they may deal with childcare? I mean, I think that there's been a trend here in terms of how the governor has gone about it, trying to exempt some of this, especially for essential workers. But just based on what we've seen, any trends, any thoughts on how that may impact that childcare or other facilities if we do go to more restrictive action?
Yeah, that's been a concern from the beginning, and it remains a struggle, I think. Childcare workers are disproportionately women of color. They're not making a lot of money, and they are certainly essential workers, especially now. And so the childcare unions and representatives have really been pushing the governor to give more money to make it more of a priority, and he has given some, and he will point to that. He carved out, spots, priority spots for families essential worker families so that there could be childcare. But that has always been the concern from the beginning of this, because schools service so much more, as we all know, than just class. And so, if this is going to be prolonged, I think that that's going to have to just push its way to the top of priorities, like it's been trying to do for several months.
Yeah, no, and I tend to agree with that assessment in terms of they've shown some tendency, and they've made it very clear. I mean, they're trying to, even while we have to take more aggressive actions, trying to protect some of the ability for folks. If you don't have childcare, you obviously can't go to work, or if you're talking about essential workers, whether it be in healthcare, or even as we're having this bigger conversation about vaccines. I think it's going to be critical, and one we would obviously advocate for. This is not an answer of what they're going to do. This is going to be a comment on what us as ACSA is going to push for, is to continue to protect our ability to offer those programs, regardless what restrictions they put on.
Sophia, just to follow up on the last question I asked you about phases of distribution, we do have a question that came in from Grace Vote about when vaccines come out. Is there a plan to open, I believe it's points of distribution for vaccines using school sites? I want to ask you about distribution, places of distribution. I know, people can get drive-through flu shots and all of that. Is that the next hill to climb for our elected leaders, for CDPH, for the governor, is to how they determine how they're going to go out and deliver the vaccine, no matter who comes first or second or third? Is that next strategy that they have to come up with?
Yeah, as far as I know, and as I think I've said a number of times during the show, it's a fluid situation and they're still discussing it. But yes, I think that's absolutely one of the open questions here. It's something they've been working on for months in terms of how distribution is going to work, in terms of whether school sites might be just distribution sites. I'm not aware of where sort of the discussions are there. I think at this point, mostly the conversations have been surrounding healthcare facilities like hospitals, and where you might be able to get sort of which hospitals are going to get the vaccines first, particularly because healthcare workers are in that like first priority category. But beyond that, I think it's still kind of an open question.
Kenzie, you were going to add something to that?
Oh yeah, schools, like we said, are much more than schools. You're driving through and getting tested right now at schools. And LA Unified has offered to be a distribution site. And I think there's a lot of national conversations about schools being distribution sites for sure.
Yeah. Mackenzie, one more question for me. Politico reported on this week about 7 families who are essentially taking the state, and I think they named the state superintendent, the state board, in a lawsuit against failing to ensure the basic educational equity through distance learning. That some families just don't have the required necessities to be able to provide or to receive educational equity, as the lawsuit points out. Obviously, our folks have been talking about liability and some of the concerns. This lawsuit, I don't believe, names school districts, but based on your reporting, on your conversations, do you see more coming on this road? Is this something that's now folks are trying to think about taking different actions and taking the state, or in our case, LEAs, to court on some of these issues?
Yeah, this lawsuit is interesting. It's not the first like it in the state, and it might not be the last, like you said. But it doesn't try to take districts to court. It's focused on Thurmond and the state, and what it's focused on is this constitutional guarantee for education, and it recognizes, hey, if you can't guarantee a classroom, you are still obligated to guarantee an equal distance learning experience, and the state is not doing that right now. And when we talk about liability, I think about the beginning of this pandemic. School administrators were really concerned about liability with special education students. There were legal threats there in California and across the country, because everyone felt lost. Teachers, parents, how do you deliver an IEP on distance learning? So we saw it play out there. You know, there are lawmakers looking out for teachers and school administrators right now regarding liability. And it all comes down to this concern and demand for more centralized common standards from the state, because if you have more of that, then you'll have less liability on individual schools.
Hey, before you guys go, and this is what's going to make the highlight piece of your respective newsrooms over at the Bee and Politico. Let's cover this right now. Favorite holiday tradition, whether it was from last week or from a few weeks from now. Sophia, you first, and then Mackenzie. Favorite holiday tradition.
Yeah, so I would say my favorite holiday tradition that I don't think my family is going to be able to participate in this year because you know, we live separately and we're not probably going to be able to get together given this new surge. But just like playing games with my family, we always have like family game nights with my parents and my little brother. We play games like Catchphrase and Set, and so hopefully we'll be able to find a way to do those virtually this year. And
Mackenzie?
Binge watching Lifetime Christmas movies, which I've already started doing, and it's only the 2nd of December. So
there you go. That's going to be written on the whiteboard in your respective newsrooms. You can guarantee that. Sophia Bolak from the Sacramento Bee, Mackenzie Mace from Politico. Thank you both so much for being with us today. It's been an honor to have you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Edgar, this has been, we have had, I think, I saw this like 250 live viewers today, Edgar, which is incredible today and such important information. And we're only like half a week into this week. So there's an incredible amount of time for more to happen.
Yeah, I have to say, and I know you fall in this category, and our executive producers, Gianna and Michael and yourself, just the role that the education media plays on this. And Sophia and Mackenzie are part of a bigger establishment. I don't know how many times when trying to dissect an important educational policy issue, I'll point them to articles, you know, whether it be Politico, SacB, EdSource, just trying to break down what is often complicated. So I just appreciate both of them coming on and trying to give some sense to what's happening in our crazy world.
Yeah, it is great to have journalistic excellence on this show, and having those two on here, so good to have their insight and a look into their reporting. We asked both of them about their favorite holiday tradition, and I want to tell you about one of mine. My favorite holiday tradition is being able to just kind of reflect, look back at photos from some of the, you know, holidays that have happened, some of the incredible moments that have happened. And we got a photo yesterday that I want to pop up. I'm going to have our executive producer, Michael Kelly, pop this up.
Oh my God.
We got this photo in from the great superintendent in Paris Unified, Grant Bennett. This, ladies and gentlemen, is Edgar back in high school from his high school yearbook. Do you want to talk that up?
Oh my
Edgar?
God. Well, it's funny when I told Sophia earlier, I love how you're just keeping the picture up. When I told Sophia I'd be nervous about if my high school principal was on, but now, as you mentioned, one of our leaders at ACSA, Grant Bennett, wasn't my principal. He was actually the athletic director at the time, but essentially he then went on to be principal. So the second I made that comment, I was like, oh, actually Grant Bennett probably would have some material, and I had no idea this was coming, so somewhat embarrassed. But thanks, Grant. Thanks for giving him some material there.
You know, I was gonna make you feel more comfortable about it, because I thought maybe it would come like this week after the show. Maybe Grant would remember after the show, and I would come on there and I'd say, "Here you go, Edgar. I decided to pull my high school yearbook photo out here so you wouldn't feel bad." But man, Grant was so on top of it. He didn't hold back when he had it.
I remember that. And and like Gail said, I am jealous. I'm not jealous of so much of the picture. Always jealous of the hair, you know.
See, that's good. That's good. All right, folks, thank you so much for being with us. We've got just an incredible amount of information for you. Still 2.5 days left in this week. We will be back here next Wednesday with another edition of our show. Edgar, good to see you, man.
All right. Always fun, as always.
Thanks so much, folks, for being with us. We'll see you next Wednesday here on the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break.